I am Margaret Freeman, a co-director of the Myrifield Institute, and we're here today to start a new 15-minute series on interviewing people who work in the area of cognition and the arts. So I'm happy to welcome Denis Akhapkin from St. Petersburg, who is with us today to kick off the series. So Denis, let me start with a question. Where do you place yourself in the fields of cognition and the arts?
Oh, it's quite a big field, so it's hard to place myself somewhere in there. But I'd say that I came from the literary linguistics. So I studied as a student, as a PhD student, but at some point in my studies, I understood that I need to understand more about conceptual structures that underlie language and poetic language too. So I start to drift in direction of cognitive linguistics, especially a theory of metaphor and cognitive semantics. And then I understood on the next step that I need more. I need to know how, for example, how the attention works, how the memory works when we work in memory, long-term memory when we deal with literary texts. So I made the next step, to the cognitive psychology. So I'd say that right now I am somewhere between literary linguistics, cognitive linguistics, and cognitive semantics, and cognitive psychology. Here I am, and of course I am at Myrifield.
At this moment, that's right. So, what does a cognitive approach offer readers of poetry that traditional approaches don't?
It's a good question because we should divide, distinguish two things. Researchers and readers. And the good news that there is some instruments, some things that cognitive approach provides to both categories. But so if we speak about readers, your question was about them. So I'd say as a reader, as in my impression, yes,
Yeah.
at the first time, and then of course I have experience of my students and of the participants of our experiments and so on. But for me, when I start to pay attention to reading, not only in terms of excavating some meaning from a poem and so on, but in terms of as a process, when I start to pay attention of how it works, what actually what happens when my eyes are on the page, what happens when I, for example, I have a phone call that distracts me from reading, and then I return, and is it just like you can pause this video recordings and then unpause it, and it's it works because it's but the human attention doesn't work by such way. You need some time to establish relationships with the text. You need some time to as we say, to immerse into this. Yes, to start to build the textual world. And this is not like one moment flash. You start and you know everything. So when readers can know something about the process, they can yes, they can have more joy from that process and more sense. It's not like I will teach you and all people how to read. I'm far from that. I'm so far from that. But let me give you an example. So you drive a car. Yes, you technically you have no need to know what is inside your car, how it works. You just you have a keys, you have you have a pedal, you just of course the wheel. Yes, and you just drive down the road. But if you know a little bit more how your car works, especially if you drive a stick car, yes, you know when you need to to shift gears, when you need to accelerate, how to drive it better. The same thing, I think, in my opinion, is with reading. Of course, this metaphor, it's quite mechanistical, it's quite it's simplified, the process. But I start to use the metaphor to explain something, and this is what actually is interesting about the text, about the poetic text, how metaphors work. And you to be maybe to understand more about text, you have to just, it's interesting to to read some some cognitive linguistics and cognitive psychology stuff, just.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that you are concerned with your readers and you yourself as an individual reader,
Yeah.
and then your readers in general. So could you describe your own practice with your own research and with your students? Give us some details.
Yeah, I will try to do that. Let me start from one maybe one example about I've mentioned before the immersion,
Yeah,
yes,
right.
as a process. So imagine some piece of poetry. Yes, it could be
Yeah.
it could be a short poem or the fragment of a longer poem,
Or it
and
could be 130 lines, like
yeah,
Alan's Corson's Inlet.
yeah, it could be, but
Yeah.
in practical, in an experimental, environment, it's
Ah,
better to work with,
smaller
short with,
text.
yeah. It's, I'm not saying that it's impossible to work with a bigger text, but it's just in terms of economy, yes, and the time and
Right.
efforts and so on. So, and imagine that there is some, something in this poetic text, some implicit reference to another, poetic text. It could be somewhere in the beginning, near to the, the first line to poem, or it could be, closer to the end of the poem. So what we are doing, there's, as usually in these experiments, there's two groups: the control and experimental. The control group have no idea about, they have no information about this, hidden reference. They just have some basic information about the poem, so who is the author, when it was, published, and so on. An experimental group uh, mm, has some, some short commentary about this is a reference to the poem of the poet, B. Yes, if this is the poet A,
Right.
yes, and the lines of the poet B is as and you can read it here. So this short, like a footnote, like a footnote,
Right.
and somewhere and then when they start to read it, actually, our initial hypothesis was that those who know the context better
Right.
will have a better impression from the text. And after, of course, after reading, they have some they do some tests. They write down some impressions and so on, and we measure the speed of reading. So it's there's a lot of the software and hardware that we can use.
Uh-huh.
And but the trick is that it even uh, doesn't depend from the knowing the broad context. It depends from that level of immersion. So if this is this reference in the beginning of the fragment,
Fragment.
so the control group who has no idea about that references, they see like some blank reference, that pointer that somewhere shows somewhere, but they have no idea where. So, and then they reflect that the text is broken or something like we cannot understand what is that and so on. But the experimental group is okay. But to the end of the text, if the reference is closer to the end, they just they report that it's okay. They trying to build the new links inside the poetic text because they are immersed.
Right.
Yes, they're trying to make sense from that. Yes, and they do, and sometimes their explanation is even more interesting than explanation of people from experimental group, because experimental group, participants from experimental group, sometimes they just point out, oh yes, this is reference to the poet B, full stop. Yeah. So now, but the control group, they try to, and this is some reference. We have no idea, but we understand that there is something bigger than that here. So, and so it's quite interesting. I cannot tell in 15 minutes. I cannot tell you all this stuff. So I will stop here. But it's interesting.
Well, you've given the experimental group some knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? Is that necessary? You mentioned some members of the control group who really, discovered some interesting things in themselves. So I'm wondering how you are activating the cognitive capabilities of your students in order to experience the poem in terms of what it's saying and doing, rather than just looking for a meaning.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I can feel, the sense of your question, and I think you're right that knowledge is not the keystone. It's not all. Of course, you have to have some knowledge. You have to have the knowledge of the language and some facts and some poetical tradition. For example, if you read a sonnet, it would be better that you
knew the structure of the sonnet.
Yeah. But in fact, the poetic text can influence us by very different ways. It's not only our brain who is in charge when we read, it's all our body. The other senses is what cognitive, actually, this is the dimension that cognitive science opens to us. It's something that we can do with just literary linguistics. Yes. So my answer is the poetry is not reading poetry is not just excavating some meaning using your knowledge of this world. It's a sensation. Yes.
Yeah.
And your body reacts to this. Your breathing, temperature, and so on. And I remember this famous Russian psychologist Leo Vygotsky, who before the experimental, equipment, before all that, with some, modest means that he had, he showed how the temp of breathing changing when people read some. It wasn't poetry; it was a short story, but
it's literature.
But your body actually reacts.
Yeah.
Not only your brain.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's great. So, is there anything else you'd like to say?
And I think I'd like to add a few things about what cognitive actually approach can give us, and 3 things that regular linguistics or literary linguistics cannot do on a full scale. The first one is to deal with multimodality of reading, because we not only our vision or our hearing can participate in this, all our senses. So we not just see the meaning of words, the shape of words, the meaning of words. We can see the shape of words, and there is a lot of visual poetry. I will not go there, but the second, the reading is a dynamic process. So I told about this, different levels of immersion in the text. So it's dynamic process, and we should study it as a dynamic process.
Yeah, it's not just static reading.
Yeah, not just static. It's important where are you in the text, in the start and the beginning, and what's happening around you actually. Yes, distractors, some attractors, and so on. So, and the third one, and most important maybe for me, this is this very idea of immersion, of building of the text world step by step, and this is and the practical some practical takeout for readers. You asked me before about readers, is that it's better to create some some atmosphere, some situations where when you have no distractors like your your phones or some your TV on the background or something, because to to enjoy the text, to be with the text.
Text.
You have to immerse into it and have no distractors. So it's a practical advice. Just concentrate on the reading.
It's actually cognitive scientists make a distinction between what they call shallow, I prefer the word surface processing, and deep processing. So it sounds as though that's what you're really getting at.
That's absolutely the same, Margaret. Yes.
That's great. Well, thank you, Denis.
Thank you.
That's been an interesting 15 minutes, and I'm so happy you could come to Myrifield to join us and start this series.
Me too. Yeah.
So thanks again.
Thanks.